on the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Open Line tonight. I'm Carrie Sharp. Tonight, we are talking about the gun violence in America. It's something that we just have to talk about tonight after 2 more mass shootings in one weekend. 31 people dead now from these 2 shootings that you've seen all over the news. I know it has a lot of us feeling pretty helpless, pretty hopeless, and just shaking our head on what do we do? Why is this happening? We're going to talk about it tonight, so you are always free to call in. That's what Open Line is tonight. The number will be at the bottom of the screen, 615-737+. I want to introduce you to our guest sitting alongside me tonight. Her name is Jessie McKinney. She's with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Jessie, thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know this was short notice. We just felt like we had to just have an open dialogue about this, and we tend to do this after every mass shooting. It gets our attention, and we say, what do we do? You're with a group that has been working behind the scenes for some time now. Tell me about Moms Demand Action.
Yeah, so Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement of mothers and others, as we like to say, who are advocating for common sense gun policies that will make our communities safer across America. And the interesting story about Moms Demand Action, it was actually started by an Indiana mother in her kitchen on a Facebook page the day after the Sandy Hook massacre. She felt like there should be an organization like Mothers Against Drunk Driving that would advocate and keep children safe from gun violence. So she was a mom in her kitchen, not knowing what to do, so she decided to take action. She started a Facebook group, and from there it's just snowballed. We're now the largest grassroots advocacy organization in the United States around gun violence prevention. We have 6 million supporters, and we are active in all 50 states.
And I want to hear more, and we will hear more as the hour goes on, about what this group is advocating for, where you think we need to see action and see lawmakers step in. I also appreciate your story, much like the mom who started this. You don't really have a survivor story. You have one of the stories that a lot of us feel right now, just throwing our hands up in the air saying, I can't believe this is our America. I don't know what to do. I want to do something, but what will make a difference, right?
Correct. So I am one of the lucky ones. I have not been personally impacted by gun violence in America, but like you, like other mothers across the country, I watch the news and I see the stories of mass shootings, and I see the children and others being gunned down in places that are supposed to be where they feel safe, in parks, in churches, in grocery stores, in their schools. And every mass shooting, I hear, and we have this conversation, we need to do something, what can be done, but yet so little has been done. And then personally, as a resident of Tennessee, I hear these stories of these mass shootings across the country, and then I also hear news stories of children in Tennessee who access unsecured firearms and unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else. In fact, Tennessee is the leading state in the nation for unsecured firearm injuries of children. And so I think it was this combination of seeing the mass shootings that raised my awareness to the issue of gun violence, and then coupled with those daily news stories of the more daily gun violence that we experience in our cities, that made me decide that I had to do something. I may not have all the answers, and I may not know all the right things to do, but until we all start to step up and say, I can do something little, nothing's going to get done.
You know that every mass shooting then cues, right on cue, is that big debate of gun laws. And you know, you have folks who say, I want to keep my guns. Others say, we got to get rid of all guns. Where does Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, I think, right? For gun sense in America. What does gun sense mean? Where do you all think this change should happen?
Yes, well, I think it's important to realize that we are not anti-gun. We are pro-Second Amendment, and we think there is a place in our society in America for responsible gun ownership and safety. So I think we are striving for common sense policies that most Americans actually will agree with when they sit down and they hear what it is that we're advocating for. So some of the small things that we are wanting to do right now now, particularly right now at this moment, is the House of Representatives recently passed a bill that would extend the background checks, and so it would close some of the loopholes. And now that has been sitting for months waiting for the Senate to take a vote and act on that. So that's something that we can do right now as, you know, Nashvillians, as Tennesseans. You can call your senators and ask them to please take a vote on this background check measure. Other things that we can do are to spread awareness around the safety of securing firearms, to make sure that people like children and others don't need to access them, and make sure we're storing them in a safe way.
Let's go back to the background checks. I think that people really need to understand what this bill proposes. It closes some of the loopholes. It also extends the waiting period to 10 days to allow, I think, one of the things for that background check to go through. I don't think a lot of folks know that sometimes guns can be sold without the checkoff from the background check.
Correct, and that's one of the loopholes that is important that we close, because sometimes there are time limits right now where the background check might not have come back, but the time period is short, and so even though the report hasn't come back that this person should be allowed to have a firearm, they are able to buy it because of that waiting period. Another thing that's really important to understand is that right now there are no background checks on unlicensed gun sales. And so what this means is that just, you know, like we have Craigslist or, you know, people that sell personal firearms to another person, those are considered unlicensed sales, and there is no background check.
Or a gun show.
Exactly, or a gun show. So if you purchase a firearm through a licensed dealer, the background check is done, but we know that many gun sales are done person to person and no background check is done, and that's one of the loopholes that we think is important to close.
And just so you know at home, Senate Democrats are pushing Mitch McConnell to call everyone back from summer recess so a vote can be taken on this bill. He hasn't said yet whether he will do it, but that is one thing that is happening right now in Washington, D.C. And as Jesse said, if you care about this, if you want to see this happen, now is the time to call your senator and say, get back to D.C., do your job. So just so you know, that's where things stand at this very moment. We're going to jump right to the lines. This is what Open Line is about. We want to hear from you. Tammy is on the line tonight. Tammy, you are up first. We would love to hear how you weigh in on this.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Now, I have a few things to say, because I'm sure that, you know, if we put our heads together, maybe we can come up with something. So I just want to go back. Ever since, I believe, Columbine, I've been sort of taking note of a couple aspects of these shooters. One, they're under 25. Two, they're living at home. Three, they have had past incidences where someone has said they had some kind of mental problem or a behavior problem or something else. Now, of course, also we've heard many of these mass shooters were on video games and all of that, you know, most of the day. But I don't think the video games is the problem. What I believe is the problem, and, you know, and I'm sorry to say this, but the parents, there's a disconnect between the parents and their children, and the parents have neglected to tap in closely enough to their kids. And another thing parents have done, particularly middle-class parents, I believe, because most of these kids were middle-class, is that they don't want to be embarrassed. When someone says your kid has a problem, they don't want to take them in for therapy. You know, in the old days, if you went to see a psychiatrist, something, you know, something was wrong with you. So a lot of people still have that stigma. Now, let me give you a perfect example to support what I'm saying. Adam Lanza, Sandy Hook. Though he was 20 years old when he committed the crime, 12 years earlier, the school social worker suggested to the mother that he go into therapy. She said no, pulled him out, said she would homeschool him, and 12 years later, look what happened. So I think that parents need to start facing the reality that if you've got young children in your home, it's your job to know them, to know what they're doing, to not let them sit up in the room all day long, not be on video games. Take them to get therapy in elementary. We can't do anything about the ones who've committed these crimes now, but get to these kids in elementary. But it's the parents' job, and I think maybe if the criminal justice system start holding some of these parents accountable after these people commit these crimes, maybe they'll start taking their responsibilities more seriously. So that's my take on it.
Tammy, thank you so very much. I think Tammy brings up a point that we will hear a lot tonight. Of course, we hear a lot after each of these shootings, is the aspect that mental illness plays in a lot of this. Does Moms Demand Action talk about that? Have any sense of where the country needs to go in dealing with mental illness?
Definitely. I think one of the aspects of gun violence that Moms Demand Action is aware of is that it's a very intersectional issue. So you can't talk about gun violence without also talking about mental health in our country, or the aspect of racism and hate-fueled crimes, as well as other aspects like that. So I think it's important that we look at gun violence as an intersectional and a very widespread issue. I think one of the things that Tammy brought up is that oftentimes when we look back, there are warning signs that we can point to and say, oh, you know, we might have noticed this, or maybe something could have been done. And I have a couple of things that I want to share with Tammy about that. I think one of the important things to think about when we have warning signs is that that's one of the reasons that safe storage of guns in the home is so important. If you have a child or a teen who might be exhibiting warning signs of wanting to commit a violent act, that's even more important, even one more reason why it's so important to make sure that they do not have access to unsecured firearms in their home. Easy access to a gun can make someone who has these inclinations act. And so I think that's an important thing to consider. And the other important point that I want to bring up to Tammy is that right now there's a national conversation around something called red flag laws. These are also called extreme risk protection orders, or ERPOs. And they're kind of similar in the way of a domestic violence or a restraining order of protection. And so this is when, if a loved one or the police notices that someone is exhibiting signs that they are a danger to themselves or to others, they can petition to a judge and present evidence, and the judge will decide whether or not that person should have their access to firearms temporarily restricted until that moment of crisis can be passed. So in some instances, we know we may not be able to prevent all mass shootings, but that may be an action that we can take that could prevent some. And then likewise, we may not be able to prevent all acts of suicide by gun, but being able to restrict someone's access to a firearm in a moment of crisis may also help save that life.
These red flag laws have passed in, I think, 17 states in D.C., is that correct? And Moms Demand Action has a campaign in those states saying one thing that you can do.
Exactly.
So people understand the law, know how it works, and hopefully will act on it if they feel so inclined. Let's get back to the phone lines. Joe is waiting ever so patiently. Joe, are you with us tonight?
Hello?
Hello, Joe. Go ahead. We got a lot of background noise there. Go ahead with what you have to say.
All right, I don't think it's right. In other countries, I don't think, I've seen in the past, in a couple instances in countries here, where there was a mass murder, there was an underage girl, and they only said her first name.
Joe, I think we're losing you there, but I think I get your point. I've heard this before, that the media should not say the shooters' names. And I think that you will see that trend happening. Not that we won't say the shooter's name, but that we're saying it a lot less. I think that you hear it reported, who it was, and then the focus is more and more turning to the victims, because I think that we as a whole have said we don't need to glamorize these shooters. I personally, as a journalist, feel like it needs to be on record, and we do need at some point to take a look at that person and their family and see where things went wrong, because there are lessons to be learned. But I think that our responsibility as journalists is to make sure that we are not glamorizing or giving any fame to this person to encourage any copycats. So I think that's where you're going with that. A lot of people say that, and I agree to some level, but I think that we do have a responsibility to let the facts be known, because I think there are lessons to be learned. Let's go ahead and go to, let's see, we have David on the line. David, thank you for being with us tonight. What's your question or comment?
Back in 1976 and years afterwards, none of these things occurred. And these things are occurring because our nation is exporting our manufacturing jobs in the name of uncontrolled greed, and simultaneously they're importing unwanted, unwelcome, unneeded people into a nation that's depleting its jobs. And the news media is told by Wall Street what is and is not news, and what you can and cannot report. If you really want to start depleting these incidences, then stop allowing Wall Street to control you and turn you into the infotainment media instead of the news media. And I'll be willing to bet you can't tell me what the original canons of journalistic ethics are, can you?
Well, I can tell you this, David, that Wall Street does not sit in on our morning meetings, so they are not controlling our morning meetings and telling us what to report. So we strive to hold the powerful accountable. We tell the truth. We hold ourselves accountable in that, and we try to reflect what's happening in our community so others can learn and be informed. I think if we can do that every day, then we're doing a really good job. Are there always ways that we can improve? Without a doubt. So this is Open Line. It is your chance to be heard. We are talking about the gun violence in America. Jesse, we have talked a little bit about the background checks, the red flag laws. What is the status just here in Tennessee when it comes to passing those red flag laws?
Yes, so we actually did have a red flag law introduced in the last session of the Tennessee legislation, and it did not go anywhere. It did not advance to a vote, but that is definitely something that I would encourage people, if that's something that they feel passionate about, that they reach out to their representatives and let them know that they want that discussed in the upcoming legislative session. So it was introduced, and I think there was a little bit of opposition. I think there's still a lot of understanding about what that law is and how it might work in this state, and so we don't have one now. It did not come to a vote, and I think that's one of the reasons why we also can put some pressure to our federal elected officials to maybe consider passing a federal red flag law, so that way we can be safe no matter what our state elected officials do. We can be protected by a red flag law that may be considered at a federal level.
Okay, very good. This conversation is going to continue for the next hour. We would love to hear from you. The phone lines are open. 615-737+ is the number to call. We're coming right back.